It was around 1:45 in the morning when I got the ping. An Uber request from a pickup spot just outside the main strip of New Bloomfield, Pennsylvania. The map showed the drop-off point as Maple Hollow. I'd never heard of it, but I've been driving nights for years, and rural rides like this usually meant either someone heading home from a bar or something sketchy. When I pulled up, the street was darker than it should have been. No streetlights, just the glow from my dashboard. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. Not from a doorway, not from a porch, from behind a tree. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and kept his head tilted down as he approached. I rolled the passenger window halfway down and asked, "Are you Kyle?" There was a pause before he nodded once. Just once. Then he got in the back seat. He didn't smell like alcohol. He didn't smell like anything at all. The lack of any scent, in fact, made me notice the faint, cold draft that came from his direction. "Maple Hollow?" I asked. He said yes, but the word didn't sound quite right. It was like he was repeating a word he'd heard someone else say, perfectly, but without understanding it. The GPS said 37 minutes. We pulled out onto the main road. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something strange. There were no other cars. Not just few, none. Even on rural roads at this hour, you'd expect at least one set of headlights, maybe a truck hauling. But the darkness ahead of us was absolute. When I glanced in the rearview mirror to check on him, I saw his face for the first time. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly out the side window, but his eyes, they were wide open, not blinking, fixed on something in the dark woods passing by. I turned my eyes back to the road, but my chest felt tight. The GPS rerouted without warning. I didn't miss a turn. It just changed. New route found. Estimated arrival, 51 minutes. I sighed. Sorry about this, man. GPS gets dumb out here sometimes. Silence. We drove on, deeper into roads I didn't recognize. The pavement was cracked, faded, like no one had driven on it in years. My headlights caught old, bent road signs I didn't remember ever seeing before. Then, out of nowhere, my passenger spoke. "Have you ever been to Maple Hollow?" It was the first time he initiated conversation, but the way he said Maple Hollow made my stomach turn. His voice carried something I can only describe as hunger. "No," I said, forcing a laugh. "Can't say I have." His lips curled slightly upward, not into a smile, more like someone testing the shape of an expression. A minute later, the GPS lost signal entirely. The road ahead narrowed, the woods on either side pressing in, branches overhead blotting out even the faint moonlight. My headlights flickered. That's when I saw movement ahead. Not an animal, not a person, more like a figure just barely in the beam, moving the same speed we were, but off the ground. I slowed down, my heart pounding in my ears. When I looked in the mirror, my passenger was now staring straight ahead, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Keep going," he said quietly. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct screamed to get out of there. But the road had become so narrow that reversing would have been impossible without hitting the trees. We passed through a stretch where the woods opened slightly, revealing a wide field. In the distance, I could see faint lights, like an old gas station sign flickering. Relief started to creep in, until I noticed there was no sound. No insects, no wind, nothing. The night was hollow. We came to a crossroads. The GPS was still dead. My passenger leaned forward between the seats, his head now close enough for me to feel the cold coming off him. "It's left," he whispered. I didn't ask how he knew. I just turned. After another minute, we reached a sign that said, "Welcome to Maple Hollow." The sign looked ancient, wood, cracked, with peeling paint. But what stopped me cold was the date underneath. Established 1814, abandoned 1992. I slowed to a crawl. The buildings ahead were rotting, windows boarded, roofs caved in. Yet faint yellow light glowed from some of them. I parked where the road ended. "This is as far as I go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My passenger didn't answer. I turned to look. The back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I would have heard it. But there was something else. The seat was warm. In the distance, through the dead streets of Maple Hollow, I saw him, standing perfectly still, facing me, and behind him, in the shadows of the buildings, dozens of other figures were beginning to step forward, all moving exactly the same way he had from behind that tree when I first saw him. That was the last ride I ever took. It was just another Tuesday night, the kind where the exhaustion clings to you like a second skin. I'd ordered an Uber after a late meeting, just wanting to get home and finally switch off. The ride itself was unremarkable. The driver silent, focused on the road. Maybe a little too silent now that I think about it, but I was too drained to care. He dropped me off. I mumbled a thanks, and practically stumbled into my apartment. The next morning, as I was rushing to get ready for work, it hit me. I hadn't rated my Uber driver. Usually it's automatic, a quick 5 stars and you're done. But last night, I'd completely forgotten. I pulled out my phone to do it, but the ride wasn't showing up in my history anymore. Weird, but whatever. I had more pressing things to worry about. That's when the first strange thing happened. I was pouring my coffee when I heard a faint whisper behind me. 3 stars. I spun around. No one was there. I dismissed it as my tired brain playing tricks. But then, as I was walking to the bus stop, a woman I'd accidentally bumped into yesterday shot me a dirty look. Above her head, and I swear I saw it, clear as day, a fleeting 2 stars flickered for a split second. I blinked, thinking I was going crazy. But throughout the day, it kept happening. People I interacted with, even strangers on the street, seemed to have these invisible ratings floating above them, or sometimes directly in my line of sight. And then I noticed something even more disturbing. After a particularly pleasant conversation with my colleague Sarah, I felt a sudden surge of energy, a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. Later, when a grumpy client gave me a scathing look, my left pinky finger started to ache, a deep, throbbing pain that came out of nowhere. By the time I got home that evening, I was on the verge of a breakdown. I tried to explain it to my roommate, Liam, but he just stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Invisible ratings? Your finger hurting because someone looked at you funny? He chuckled nervously. Maybe you should get some sleep, man. But I knew what I was seeing, what I was feeling was real, and it was getting worse. When the delivery guy brought my pizza, a 5 stars flashed above his head, and suddenly my headache vanished. Then a group of teenagers laughing at something I tripped over, a collective 1 star, and a sharp stabbing pain shot through my right ear, making me cry out. I was living in a world where my very being was being judged, constantly, and these judgments were having real physical effects on me. The better the rating, the better I felt. The worse the rating, I didn't even want to think about it. What happened with a 1-star rating? That pain in my ear was terrifying enough. Then I remembered the Uber, the silent driver, the ride I never rated. Could this be connected? Was this some kind of twisted revenge? I spent the rest of the night frantically searching online for anything about a cursed Uber ride, invisible ratings, anything that could explain what was happening to me. I found nothing. I was alone in this nightmare, a world where every interaction was a life-altering judgment, and the fear that gnawed at me wasn't just the physical pain but the utter lack of control. I was at the mercy of everyone I encountered, my body and mind a scoreboard for their fleeting opinions. As I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, the last thing I saw in my mind's eye was the blank face of the Uber driver, and a single question echoed in the darkness. What happens when I get my first 0-star rating? Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with shadowy figures holding up scorecards, the numbers flashing and changing with terrifying speed. I woke up feeling even more drained, my body aching all over. As I looked in the mirror, I gasped. My left pinky finger was shorter. Just by a fraction, but definitely shorter. The pain from last night was gone, but the physical change was undeniable. The 1-star rating hadn't just caused pain, it had taken something from me. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just about feeling good or bad anymore. This was about my physical integrity. What would happen with another 1-star? Would I lose another finger? An ear? I couldn't go to work. I called in sick, my voice trembling. Liam looked at me with concern. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." It's the ratings, Liam," I stammered, trying to explain again. This time, I showed him my finger. He looked closely, a furrow in his brow. "I don't see anything different, Mark. Maybe you should really see a doctor." I knew he wouldn't understand. This was my curse, mine alone. I spent the day hiding in my apartment, terrified of interacting with anyone. But the world doesn't stop just because you're scared. The doorbell rang. It was the mailman. He smiled and handed me a package. Above his head, 4 stars appeared. A wave of relief washed over me, a temporary reprieve. But then later that afternoon, I had to go out for groceries. The supermarket was a gauntlet of judgment. A woman tutted when I accidentally bumped her cart, 2 stars, and a wave of nausea washed over me. My vision blurred for a moment. A little boy smiled at me, 5 stars, and the nausea receded, replaced by a fleeting feeling of well-being. It was exhausting, this constant emotional and physical roller coaster. I found myself obsessively trying to please everyone, smiling too much, apologizing for everything. It was pathetic, but I was desperate. I couldn't afford another bad rating. That night, the real terror began. I was lying in bed trying to calm my racing thoughts when I felt a cold presence in the room. The air grew heavy, and I heard a faint scraping sound coming from the corner. I pulled the covers up to my chin, my heart pounding. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure, translucent and indistinct, standing in the corner of my room. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by darkness. Above its head, flickering faintly, was a 1-star. Pure, unadulterated terror gripped me. This wasn't just a bad feeling or a missing finger. This was a presence, a malevolent entity brought into my life by someone's negative judgment. The figure began to drift towards me, its movements slow and deliberate. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in my own bed as this ghostly consequence of a bad rating approached. The air grew colder, and I could feel an icy dread seeping into my bones. This was what a 1-star rating truly meant. Not just a physical loss, but a direct link to something dark and otherworldly. And as the shadowy figure reached the side of my bed, its unseen hand reaching out, I knew that my life had become a living hell, governed by the invisible, unforgiving judgment of strangers. The touch was like ice, a freezing grip that seemed to steal the very warmth from my soul. The shadowy figure loomed over me, and I felt a part of me being drained away, leaving behind only a hollow emptiness. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone, fading back into the darkness of the corner. I lay there, gasping for breath, covered in a cold sweat. The next morning, I woke up to find a patch of my hair had turned stark white. The terror was escalating. I couldn't live like this, constantly walking on eggshells, my body and soul at the mercy of anonymous judgments and ghostly visitations. I had to find a way to stop this. The only connection I could think of was the unrated Uber ride. Maybe if I could somehow rate that driver, this nightmare would end. But the ride was gone from my history. There was no way to contact him. Desperation fueled a frantic search. I remembered the date and time of the ride. I scoured my bank statements, hoping to find some trace of the transaction, any information about the driver. Finally, buried deep in the records, I found a transaction with a cryptic ID. It led nowhere in the Uber app, but a reverse search online yielded a single chilling result. An old news article about an Uber driver who had died in a car accident on the night I took that ride. His name was Elias Thorne. A cold dread washed over me. The silent driver, the missing ride, the curse of the ratings. It all clicked into place. I had failed to acknowledge his service, and now, his spirit, or something far more sinister, was tied to my existence through this twisted rating system. I had to make amends. I found the address of the accident site, a desolate stretch of highway on the outskirts of the city. That night, I took another Uber there. As I stood at the side of the road, the wind howling around me, I pulled out my phone. I opened a notes app and typed, "Elias Thorne, your service was appreciated. 5 stars." As I hit save, the air around me grew intensely cold. A faint spectral figure appeared on the other side of the road, its form flickering in the darkness. It looked like the shadowy figure from my room, but somehow sadder. Above its head, the 1 star shifted, slowly, agonizingly, to a 5 stars. A wave of warmth washed over me, chasing away the bone-chilling cold. The pain that had been a constant companion for days vanished. My finger didn't grow back, and the white patch in my hair remained. But the immediate threat was gone. The ghostly figure across the road seemed to nod, a silent acknowledgement before fading completely into the night. The invisible ratings around other people still appeared, but they no longer seemed to affect me. The curse was lifted. I had faced the consequence of my forgotten rating and in my own way made it right. As my Uber took me home, I looked out at the passing city lights. I was changed. I knew that every action, no matter how small, had a consequence. And sometimes, those consequences could be far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. The world might still be rating, but I was no longer playing the game. I had received my final rating, and somehow, I had survived. But the memory of the cold touch, the shadowy figure, and the slow disappearance of my finger would forever serve as a chilling reminder of the night I forgot to rate my Uber driver, and the horrifying rating system that almost cost me everything. It was late, the kind of late where the city feels like a ghost town. All I wanted was to get home. My thumb slid across the Uber app and a ride appeared instantly. The driver's name was blank, not a typo, but a deliberate void. In its place, the words, "Your past," glowed with a sickly yellow light. A jolt of unease, sharp and cold, shot through me, but I was too tired to care. I tapped confirm. A sleek black car, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness, pulled up. My hand trembled as I opened the door. The interior was colder than the night air, and the scent was clean. Too clean. There was no driver. My heart hammered against my ribs as the doors clicked shut. I was trapped. The central console flickered to life. "Where would you like to go?" it asked, the words stark against the digital screen. My fingers, shaking uncontrollably, typed my home address. This had to be a prank. A terrifying, high-tech prank. The car pulled away, silent and smooth. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. Then, the car veered. It wasn't the route to my apartment. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "This isn't the way!" No response. The car continued, its speed increasing as we left the city's familiar glow behind. The streetlights gave way to thick darkness, and the world outside the window dissolved into a terrifying blur of trees and empty fields. My breath hitched in my throat as the car slowed. We were on a narrow, unpaved road. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a sight that made my blood run cold. An old, dilapidated house stood before us, its windows dark and empty like vacant eyes. My grandparents' house. The place where a memory I had buried decades ago was born. The doors unlocked with a soft click. The console screen flashed, a single line of text appearing. "Your first stop." My past. The name of the driver was not a joke. This wasn't a prank. This was a journey into my darkest secret, guided by a force with an unknown, terrifying agenda. As I stepped out of the car, a profound sense of dread washed over me. I was not a passenger. I was prey. The cold was suffocating. and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I stood before the house, a monument to a tragedy I had told myself was an accident. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A single faint light flickered in an upstairs window, Emily's room. I pushed the front door open. The hinges groaned in protest. The darkness inside was absolute, a living, breathing thing. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice a shaky echo. A soft, high-pitched giggle echoed from the top of the stairs. It was her laugh. A sound I hadn't heard in years, a sound I had longed for and simultaneously feared. A chill so profound it felt like ice in my veins shot through me. The front door slammed shut behind me, the sound a final definitive click. The giggling grew louder, more frantic. I looked up the dark staircase and a silhouette began to descend. It was small, a child's shape, moving in a jerky, unnatural way. It was wearing a white dress, the same dress she had been wearing that day. The figure stopped on the first landing. Dim light from a window fell on its face. It was Emily, but her eyes were two black, empty voids. Her mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, a caricature of her innocent smile. In her hands, she held a doll with a cracked face. "Why did you leave?" The voice was a whisper, but it filled the entire house, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I didn't," I stammered, tears streaming down my face. "It was an accident. I was just a kid." The doll in her hands turned its head to look at me, its cracked mouth silently moving. "You let go," the monstrous voice hissed, its tone filled with an ancient, bitter resentment. "You let go of my hand." My heart stopped. It wasn't the fall that had killed her. It was me. I had been holding her hand on the porch swing, and in my panic I had let go. I had buried the truth for all these years. This grotesque echo of my sister was forcing me to remember. The figure began to descend the rest of the stairs, its distorted smile growing wider. I backed away until my back hit the wall. I was trapped, my own guilt made real and malevolent. As it reached the bottom step, it held the doll up. The doll's eyes, also empty and black, fixed on mine. "Now you get to feel what I felt," the voice rasped, and the doll's head twisted to a sickening angle. I saw a flash of the porch swing, of Emily's terrified face, of my hand letting go. And then, everything went black. I opened my eyes. I was back in the Uber, but the world was gone. We were moving through a dense, suffocating fog, a void of gray and black. My head throbbed, but the pain was distant. The console flickered to life, and a single word pulsed in a sickly red light. "Confirmation." A voice deep and resonant echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You've been running from this moment your whole life," it said. "You want the pain to stop. This is your final destination. You can choose to stay in the fog of denial, or you can finally move on." The glowing word on the console changed to accept, decline. I stared at the two options, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Was this salvation or a final cruel trap? I reached out, my hand shaking, hovering over the accept button. This was it, the choice to end the torment. But just as my finger was about to press down, I heard a sound that didn't come from the car. It was faint, but unmistakable. A little girl's voice. "Don't let go this time." It was Emily, my real Emily, not the monstrous thing from the house, but the sweet sister I had loved. She wouldn't want me to give up. This was the final test. With newfound courage, I slammed my finger down on decline. The car shuddered violently. The voice roared, "You fool! You will never escape." The fog outside became a swirling vortex of black and gray. The car dissolved, and I was thrown into the chaotic maelstrom. And then, silence. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the ground, on a sidewalk, under a street lamp. The air was crisp and cold. There was no black car, no silent driver, no glowing console. My phone was in my hand, the Uber app open, the last ride canceled. Was it a dream? I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. On my palm, a small porcelain piece from a doll lay there, a tiny cracked fragment. The horror wasn't in the memory, it was in the proof. The journey wasn't over. I had faced the past and chose to fight, but it had left a piece of itself behind. I got up slowly, the shard digging into my skin. The final destination wasn't a place, it was a state of being, and I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would forever be a passenger on a ride I could never truly escape.